You may learn about investing and how to make the best financial decisions for your life on Investor Facts. Make sure you click the subscription button and enable the notification bell if you haven't already. Share, like, and comment. The world's financial situation is not now in crisis. It appears that the United States is currently experiencing recession. A recession occurred when the GDP fell in each of the first and second quarters of a row. We'll have to wait and see how the third quarter plays out, but it might go and possibly get worse. According to recent data, Europe is in a recession, in contrast to cumulative growth of over 10% for over 30 years. They revealed their most recent growth figure for 0.4% for the second quarter, not 4%, but 0.04%. And they lied. So if they're admitting 0.4%, I have to assume that's negative. As a result, we are currently facing a global recession. A financial panic is not the same thing as recession or even a depression, which it could become. As we witnessed in 1998 and 1987, panics are possible, even in the absence of recessions. Recessions are possible even without panic, as we experienced in 1990 and 2020. Sometimes, they do go hand in hand, as in 2008, when both a severe recession and a severe financial panic occurred. However, I would keep those two things distinct because if there isn't a global financial panic, there won't necessarily be dollar buying because people are saying, "Get me out of everything else." A financial panic usually results in a dollar rally. You can leave the money in the bank, but banks are unsafe. So once you have the money, you need to go make a purchase. There is a desire for dollar anywhere in the globe to buy that excellent collateral because it appears to be a safe haven in comparison to everything else that is falling apart. This is because you won't be in it for very long and your money is safe. You still receive the same amount of petrol and food. You simply spend more and the purchasing power of a dollar decreases. The Fed is about to arrive, right? My point is that they always get it wrong, whether it is the daylight or when they are a dollar short or a dollar too much. Although Bretton Woods is still in effect, the age of gold is not. All currencies were tied to the US dollar at Bretton Woods, and the US dollar was then exchanged for gold at a price of $35 per ounce, although you were linked to the dollar, which made it the kind of global hegemonic currency. If you will, you were kind of pegged to go because the dollar was tethered to gold. Although they could be redeemed for gold, the United Kingdom had far less of the precious metal than that. Economic tension with everyone, including Canada, Australia, and many Commonwealth members from Africa, were heightened as a result. But the result was a world in which the dollar was the only currency with a fixed value, and all other currencies were tied to it. The fact that the valuing against gold was complete collapse that frequently went hand in hand with a financial panic, as it did in UK in 1931, was one of the challenges of the 1920s and 1930s. While it wasn't necessarily the intention, they didn't want anyone to devalue it. They believed that if you could control the process, the dollar would always be tied to gold, which served as the system's anchor. However, if the trade deficit issues arose, a swing lender was available. They enforced various agreements. They provide loans. A few years ago, they made multi-billion-dollar loans to Ukraine. The IMF had strayed far from its initial focus and now resembles the financial arm of the US State Department. However, the original idea was that if you were in a little trouble, the IMF could provide you with a loan in dollars or gold to buy some time while you fixed whatever issue you were facing. Countries stopped converting gold and stopped exporting it. They weren't going to allow any other hand because gold was effectively money and would be essential to fighting and winning the war. It's interesting to note that one of the biggest proponents of keeping the gold standard in place, at least in the UK, was an advisor to the Exchequer named John Maynard Keynes. The gold standard was in place for almost all of 19th century, really back to the beginning of the post-Napoleonic period in 1815, before it was abruptly ended with the outbreak of World War I. Keynes has a reputation for being gold detractor, gold halter, barbarous relic, and other things he never uttered. By the way, I really looked up the original edition of his work from 1924 to see what he had to say, and he had nothing to do with gold. He was referring to the 1920s gold exchange standard, yet in 1914, he vehemently urged that the UK shouldn't abandon the gold standard. He made the statement because he believed that credit, rather than cash or gold, would be the means by which the battle would be won. Basically, you'll need to take out a lot of loans to fund this, and suspending gold will ruin your credit. Maintaining the gold standard will keep your credit intact, allowing you to borrow more money to fight the war. And that is exactly what happened when New York-based Jack Morgan raised huge sums of money for France and the UK, but none for Germany, which was one of the key deciding factors. Countries had to rejoin the gold standard one at a time. They had to make significant decisions on the new exchange rate because the gold standard was voluntary and there was no IMF at that time. Each currency had a pre-World War I, pre-1914, exchange rate that was fixed to gold at the government's discretion. Naturally, as soon as you peg gold, you also peg all of the other important trading currencies, which are also linked to gold, but not everywhere. They accomplished this by devaluing the currency and increasing the price of gold valued in their currencies. Simple recognition that if you wanted to return to gold, you had to either devalue the currency to reflect the increased money supply or decrease the money supply, which would cause recession. They had produced large sums of money to fight the war. They essentially overvalued their money and returned to use gold because France was so depreciated when they switched back to gold. American expatriates were able to live very well in Paris in 1925 on relatively meager US dollar wages. The UK was the lone exception to that rule, and at this time, Winston Churchill, believe it or not, was Chancellor of the Exchequer, in effect acting as head of the Treasury. He felt compelled by duty and honor to return to gold at the pre-war exchange rate. The UK and the US were essentially the only voices that mattered, and the UK spoke for the entire Commonwealth and had a respectable amount of gold. However, this was really just about the US haggling, making concessions to the UK and then coming with solution. Although the Soviet Union, a natural friend of the United States during World War II, was present, they ultimately decided not to sign the pact, which is intriguing but significant aside. There were, I believe, around 45 or so countries present. Harry Dexter White, the Deputy Secretary-Treasurer, served as the chief American delegate. Henry Morgenthau was the Treasury Secretary at that time, but he was only able to work part-time. Harry Dexter White oversaw the American delegation. John Maynard Keynes served as the delegation's leader from the UK. By the way, they were, just to add one more footnote, the cause of my frequent visits to the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. It's out in the middle of nowhere, and I've been there most recently last week. It's in the White Mountains, and it's extremely stunning. You are right in the Mount Washington's foothills. So, while it's a beautiful and amazing location, getting there in the middle of nowhere may be a big challenge. The UK and the US were essentially the only voices that mattered, and the UK spoke for the entire Commonwealth and had a respectable amount of gold. However, this was really just about the US haggling, making concessions to the UK, and then coming up with a solution. Everyone else simply sort of hoped on board. I'm sure there was some back and forth, but the US and the UK worked it out. To be fair, though, it was essentially dictated by the United States. Here is where it gets fascinating because Harry Dexter White was a Stalinist agent, which was not truly confirmed until 1990s. It may have been suspected at that time, but it wasn't. Russia under Yeltsin opened up the archives when the Soviet Union disintegrated, allowing scholars to access them and provide evidence. There were several Stalinist agents in the FDR administration, including him. The worldwide gold standard, which is different from what Bretton Woods did, required that all nations connect their currencies to gold. All currencies were fixed to the US dollar at Bretton Woods, and afterwards, the US dollar was tied to gold at price of $35 per ounce. It wasn't the only reason for the 1950s, but India, I believe, became independent in 1947, and throughout the course of the decade, the African nations, including Singapore, gradually departed the UK. Therefore, it did succeed and resulted in the British Empire's dissolution. So, in a way, Morgenthau's goal was achieved. Thanks for watching the entire clip. If you like it, kindly let us know by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Also, don't forget to enable the notification bell so you can be the first to know when we post a new video. In the following video, I'll see you. Goodbye.